Netflix released a documentary called The 13th. And then within this documentary, it argues how the current criminal justice system is a continuation of slavery amongst African Americans. So let's start off with first thing at hand. So what the documentary is named after, the 13th. So according to the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, all individual slaves are freed under one exception, and that is for criminals. So the 13th Amendment was passed, and then the Civil War hit. And since these slaves were now free, which basically the whole economy was based off of the labor of slaves and slavery at the time, and then you take this system away. And so the Civil War hits and comes and goes, and the economy has to be rebuilt, but you have no one to rebuild it. So then there's that loophole that is to be used. And so you take this race, and this certain race makes up the predominancy of the population, and you start locking them up in chains, because now under the 13th Amendment, with that loophole, they are now slaves again. They don't have any freedom. Blacks were used as, once again, labor hogs to rebuild the economy, rebuild everything after the Civil War hit. And blacks were made out to look so much like criminals, so much that they were portrayed as criminals in everything, such as books, myths, and even in general, just to the general thought. As soon as a person would see a black person, you automatically assume they're a criminal, because that's what the public was sought to think. So this continuation of slavery could happen legally and under the law. Even situations such as little petty things, they would get put in jail for like loitering or going, violating certain rules, just little minor things to be able to be an incarcerated individual. And now you have to do this labor. All your rights are now taken away. It got to the point where even if a black wouldn't do anything at all, and it would be untrue, as long as they were sought out to be a criminal, then it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. It was their word against the others. One popular happening that happened in history: Emmett Till. Emmett Till was accused of looking at a white woman, and supremacists beat him, killed him, and threw him in a river. It just recently came out that that white woman was lying. And so it shows how just because this race was made out to be so hatred and so barbaric to be criminals, things would happen to this race for so long and nobody would care. So then once it got to the point, okay, everybody is seeing, you're beating on these people in front of my kids, and this is happening, so much violence and crime. So then that's when things like the Jim Crow laws came in that restricted former slaves. So it's, hey, we can't lock you all up, but the ones that are out, we're going to restrict what you can do. And that created another contribution to incarceration, because now you have segregation based off of Jim Crow laws. So black people can't use the same water fountain. We can't use the same bathroom. So then once a black person, oh, you use the whites only water fountain, you're getting locked up. Oh, you use the white person bathroom, oh, you're going to get incarcerated. So now you are now an incarcerated individual, and you now have no rights. Even during the civil rights movement, during the film, it shows different situations where even during the civil rights movement, black people aren't doing anything at all, and they're being beaten on white people and being called animals and every other name of the book, as if they've done something, as if they are criminals and they've done nothing at all. Even down to your civil rights advocates, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton. Martin Luther King was looked at as the nation's most wanted criminal. Fred Hampton they feared him because he, according to the film, he had the power, the motivational power to speak to all races, not just white, and unite all races. And they were so scared of that, so scared of an African American with that power. Illinois police shot and killed this man early in the morning while he was asleep laying in bed to his wife. They show in the film different they show in the film a little back clip of where one of his followers was filmed showing the crime scene after the police had killed him. And when it shows the picture of Illinois police carrying his dead body, they all have a smile on their face as if they've done a good reward. And it just, that picture alone for me just showed where things were at that time, that you guys would be so scared of advocates fighting for rights of a race that has done nothing, that society has painted this picture of to be animals, and to a point that you just go and wipe them out, or you try to find a way to keep them on restrictions or control their lives. Even once the Civil and Voting Rights Acts was signed, crime rate was still increasing. So they used that as a turnaround, because they looked at it as and showed it to the public. Oh, we signed this. We gave African Americans freedom, and the crime rate is still increasing. This is how they pay us back. This is how they show us, thanks for giving them freedom. But crime rate is still increasing. Look at what happens when you give criminals freedom. And it just turned the public's nose up at African Americans more, because of how they're still being made out. The cycle hasn't been broken. By 1970, according to the film, what the film calls the year of 1970, calls it the start of mass incarceration. So during this time, President Nixon was running for campaign, and with his campaign, he ran it with the war on crime, because one thing with it at this time, crime was so much of a big thing. It made it the main thing that running politicians use to try to drill in and win a campaign. And so Nixon's main campaign, like I stated, was war on crime, which in all reality meant war against Black political movements. Because Nixon saw people as Martin Luther King Jr. and Black Panthers as such a big threat and to society, because Nixon was so strict on war on crime. They looked at him as the perfect person to regulate law and order. At the end of Nixon's term, he started to introduce the war on drugs, because he had to take something that contributed to crime to keep it going. And with the drug problem that was going on within America, he looked at that as an opportunity. So the war on drugs started being looked at as a political war more than a political and crime war, more than a health war. And like I stated, politicians were able to take this and run with it, and Nixon did just that. Now, aside from Nixon doing that, Nixon presented policies that did a mass sweep, because during this war on drugs time, that's when the introduction of crack cocaine came in. Now, crack cocaine, smokable cocaine, was more popular amongst the Black communities, whereas whites still use powdered cocaine. So Nixon passed off and presented these policies that gave more incentives and gave more funding to law enforcement to be able to crack down on this drug. So any individual that was caught with crack cocaine, you got this high-rise sentences. They gave longer sentences for people who got caught with crack than regular cocaine. It wasn't treated the same. So white people most likely got a slap on the wrist. Okay, you went on about your business. Why? Just for having a gram of crack cocaine, this Black person gets 50 years. And that war on drugs went through basically the whole decade of the 1970s. But then Ronald Reagan came along in the 1980s, and he took Nixon's war on drugs and turned it into a literal thing to be able to control the Black communities. When Reagan was running for presidency, poverty level was at an all-time high. And it was at an all-time high because he was cutting funding. Reagan took the war on drugs and implemented it everywhere. Even his wife had a say no movement that everybody went crazy over. Many policies that Reagan also put into extended sentences for crack. And like I stated, instead of just regular cocaine. So he also promised through his campaign tax cuts to the rich and vowed to throw all crack users in jail. So you're vowing to throw all crack users in jail, which most crack users are African Americans. And people went berserk over that. And he ended up winning the election. The war on drugs created Black men to be shown as criminals all over. And it took a sweep because you're taking all of these African American men and locking them up and taking them away from their families. And so that poverty level is getting worse. The environment of most African American families are getting worse. And it's becoming second class, as it always has been, dropping down to third class over time. Then we get into the presidential running of Bush versus Dukakis. Dukakis had a double-digit runner-up towards Bush, and then Bush's campaign released the Willie Horton commercial. Dukakis favored releasing felons for the weekend, for them to have weekend freedom. Dukakis apparently was a felon that was released for the weekend, and he flees. So Dukakis was put in prison for supposedly stabbing a man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. And within Bush's campaign commercial, all you saw was a picture of Willie Horton. And it says that in the commercial, Dukakis favors people like Willie Horton, a convicted felon who was thrown in prison for stabbing a man repeatedly and raping his girlfriend. And so people just look and you see and you get this sense of, oh, the Black man is evil. The Black man is a criminal. Oh, the Black man is a rapist. And that's what society thinks. And that's what society puts in their head. And even Black people even started to believe this. So Black women and Black children even started to believe this about their own race, because this was what was nailed into society's head so much. And because of that commercial, Bush won the election with sweeping colors within a week. By 1990, the prison population was 1,179,200. It became impossible for any politician to run and not be tough on crime. And even when Clinton ran, Clinton tried to do something different, but he technically couldn't do it. So he still had to base his running campaign on the war on crime. In Clinton's favor, the case of Polly Klaas happened just in time, because he was able to use that as more so his main tactic. And with that came California's three strikes outlaw. So with California's three strike outlaw, once you get your third felony, you're in prison forever. Like, you're in prison for the rest of your life. California's Sheriff Department at one point in time had to release 4,200 misdemeanor of inmates a month to be able to create room for felony offenses that had been awaiting trial and hadn't been processed yet. They also introduced the mandatory sentencing, which took out probation, which basically allowed justice not to be served by the hands of the judge, but now it's being served by the hands of Congress and the government. Clinton ended up passing a 1994 federal crime bill. This bill consisted of $30 billion. And this money went to funding advanced tactics and extra funding for technology and incentives for law enforcement. It also provided extra funds for states to build prisons and made it possible for over 100,000 officers to be put into the streets to crack down on crime. And most of these tactics were seen in Black communities. By the year 2000, the prison population had doubled and went up to 2,015,300. Now, Clinton did a turnaround and he had to admit that his crime bill was a mistake. And he went on national TV and he admitted it was a mistake. However, by then, the damage was already done. And we can see now that the damage was already done. And even though the damage was done and he tried to fix it, it truly couldn't. You fast forward to 2014 and you have things like the Trayvon Martin case and racial profiling. George Zimmerman followed Trayvon Martin with a gun after being told to by operators not to proceed and follow him. And because of the stand your ground law within Florida, got away with killing this teenager who was in the community where he was staying with and where one of his parents resided, because of racial profiling, because of how Black men are made and have been made for decades within America, have been that's a criminal. Trayvon Martin was just walking through the community, but not bothering anyone, not a fly. And this white man sees him and says, oh, he's a threat. They play in the film where you hear the operator call where they tell Zimmerman not to follow him. And he says back to the operator, these guys always get away. I remember that case personally like it was yesterday. I remember my mom getting up in the morning, looking up at it. I remember how the world reacted to that. And that was just a decade ago, and things technically haven't changed despite how things have came. With that certain stand your ground law, come to find out, an organization called ALEC proposes bills on crime. And ALEC has been seen to help regulate the CAA by giving policies and funding private prisons, which more so go to rounding up Black communities. A lot of the policies focus on people of color, like immigration. Mass incarceration affected a lot of communities of color, even still today, because there are thousands of people that's sitting there standing trial and can't make bail, which ALEC also turns out to be the organization that helps with the bailing agencies within America and helps fund them. So ALEC is popular off of keeping people in jail to be able to fund these different agencies. And so it's going to be a reoccurring thing that is just going to keep happening because money rules everything. According to the film, 97% of incarcerated individuals take a plea, which keeps them in prison or in jail and away from their families because they simply can't afford it. They also pointed out that 1 in 3 Black men are more for certain to be incarcerated than other individuals, which is very, very surprising. Even still with ALEC also was the organization that funded different agencies to start ankle monitors for probation and house arrest. So even when they are releasing these individuals, you are still monitoring them. You're still putting them on restrictions. They are still incarcerated in their own home. And most of these individuals are Black Americans. You see if you go to most communities, 9 times out of 10, poverty communities, 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to see African-American male or female or just an African-American wearing an ankle monitor or under some type of restrictions under the law from previously having been incarcerated. Now, a lot of things have changed, but so much. Once Obama became president, the Black Lives Matter movement happened. There was a lot of support, but there needed more change. In my opinion, as far as policies that could be put in place, one, I feel like the loophole needs to be taken out because it gives a tool to be used. Even your current president, it showed video clips within Donald J. Trump's previous campaign, where he was, quote, he was telling people at the rally, why don't you knock the crap out of them? And back in the good old days, that doesn't happen because they used to treat them very rough. And when they protested once, it was very hard for them to protest again very easily. He followed it up, which I quote, I love the good old days. You know what they do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They leave out on the stretcher. That is the words of our current president. Our current president. So if this film has presented our current president saying those words, what is gonna change? What technically is gonna change? And I think this documentary does a great eye-opener as for how the criminal justice system does do a continuation of slavery.